And and so at the time my story ran, the odds were literally 1,000,000 to 1. Ran on October 1st, 1989. At the time it ran, odds were literally more than 1,000,000 to 1 against the case ever being reprosecuted. There was nothing in the court file anymore. I went and looked, there was almost nothing. No evidence, nothing in the vault, nothing, left over, no murder weapon, no transcript. But Myrlie Evers, the widow of Medgar Evers, believed, and she prayed. And some amazing things happened. A couple months later, Jackson police are cleaning out a closet, happened to find a box containing crime scene photographs of the killing of Medgar Evers, including the fingerprint of Byron D. LeBeckwith lifted from the murder weapon. A couple months later, Myrlie Evers shared with me her copy of the court transcript that she had saved in a safety deposit box. And a few months after that, the prosecutor in the case found the murder weapon in his father-in-law's closet. And worthy of applause. All these things that had happened did happen. And they did make a movie about this, and some of y'all may have seen it with Whoopi Goldberg and Alec Baldwin. It's called Ghost in Mississippi. I'm portrayed in the film, which is an interesting experience, I have to tell you. Because there's nothing my character said in real life, this gets said in the movie, but anyway, that's all right. But sometimes people ask me, well, there's two questions I do about the film are, were you portrayed accurately, and did you get a lot of money? And the two quick answers are no and no. I didn't get any money. And there's nothing, like I said, that I actually said in real life that's on the screen. But another question I sometimes get about the film, James Woods plays Byron D. LeBeckwith in the movie. And he does a great job and got nominated for an Oscar for that. But sometimes people ask me, well, is Beckwith, was he really that racist? You know what the answer is? He's actually more racist than they portrayed him in the movie. I know it's hard to believe. But I got to go interview Byron D. LeBeckwith. He lived in Signal Mountain, Tennessee, which is just outside of Chattanooga. And so I wound up, in order to go talk to him, by the way, I had to pass the quiz. And the quiz went like this: are you white? Where'd you grow up? Where do you go to church? What are your parents' names? Where do you live? And I could have refused to answer all those questions, but when it comes to stuff, when the word guilty rang out, you could hear. So it was amazing. You could hear the waves of joy cascading down the hall, till it reached a foyer full of people, black and white, just erupted in cheers. And I just felt chills, because I knew that really began my journey. Began my journey to look at other cases as well. And so I met with Mrs. Damer, Mrs. Vernon Damer, Ellie Damer, in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. I'm sure some of y'all know the story of Vernon Damer. Those who don't, I'll tell you, is part of that, him and his family. He joined the NAACP just after World War II. And some of y'all know, because you lived through it, what a dangerous time that was. To just belong to the NAACP in those days could get you killed. And so he was a part of that. He was very much interested and realized that the key to eliminating second-class citizenship was the vote. And he pushed the vote. And so the Klan didn't like that. Attacked what it was is their little store there. They had a home there, and then next to it had a little grocery store, okay? And so he got permission from the county. He lived out in about 6 miles north of town, out they were going to let him have people pay their poll taxes. They were still having to pay poll taxes in those days. But it was poll taxes, literacy tests, all those things were all in the 1890 Constitution. And so basically he was going to allow people to pay their poll taxes at his little grocery store, okay? So the Klan found out about that. Ended up attacking him and his family in the middle of the night, January 10th, 1966. Firebombed their house. 2 o'clock in the morning, frigid night. He woke up, heard the shot, smelled the smoke. So he grabbed his shotgun and ran to the front of the house, began firing back at the Klansmen so his family could escape safely out a back window. Unfortunately, the flames of the fire seared his lungs, and he died in its stead. A few weeks later, in the mail came his voter registration card. He had fought his life for all his whole life for the right of all Americans to be able to vote, but never been able to cast a ballot himself. The guy who ordered his killing was a guy named Sam Bowers, who's the head of White Knights, the Ku Klux Klan in Mississippi, responsible for at least 10 killings. Here in Mississippi, we know probably more, at least 10. Bowers had been tried in that case and never been convicted. And one of them I wrote about was the Birmingham church bombing. Y'all probably know about that. Unfortunately, it was September 15th, 1963. 4 little girls were down, actually 5 girls were down in the bathroom getting ready. There was a youth service that day. And in fact, you know what the name of the service was? The Love That Forgives. Isn't that amazing? And so they're preparing for that service. It was 10:21 a.m. And they're preparing for that service. And the Klan had planted a bomb in the church. The reason they did was they were angry. They all seen all the classic photographs and footage of the firemen shooting water, the dogs, all that from Birmingham. And of course, that was that spring. Well, that church had been used as kind of a staging area for the people, civil rights activists, and the children. It was a children's march that went out, and so the Klan planted that bomb, and the 5 girls were in that bathroom when the bomb went off, and it killed 4 girls. And the 5th girl is sometimes forgotten, but she was blinded. Sarah Collins. And I was glad to see her recognized as well when this past year, year before, that they honored the girls. But anyway, one of the last living suspects in that case was a guy named Bobby Cherry. And so I had talked to him on the telephone once before, but I got contact. His wife contacted me and said, Bobby wants to talk to you. So I'm like, okay. And so it turned out he didn't live that far from where I grew up. I'm originally from the schizophrenic town of Texarkana, Texarkana, Texas. So he lived near Tyler, Texas, which is not that far from there. And so I knew where it was. So I drove over from Mississippi, met him and his wife, took them out for barbecue because, well, I guess that's what you take Klansmen out for. I'm not really sure. We had barbecue, we ate, we talked. He's like, I didn't have anything to do with that church bombing. I left that sign shop. For those of you who've been to Birmingham, probably all have done that, gone over to Birmingham and been to the little museum or maybe the church too. The sign shop that he's talking about is literally like 2 blocks from where the church is. It's also where the Klan made the bomb, by the way. And so he said, well, I left that sign shop at 9:45 because I had to get home and watch wrestling. Can't make this stuff up, can you? And even pulled out the sworn statement this morning. Yes, I remember that night well. We're all sitting around watching wrestling. So in journalism, this is the way we say it in the South. One of the basic rules of journalism is this: even if your mama tells you she loves you, check it out. So I did. And so I talked to our librarian, Susan Garcia, and said, just check with the Birmingham News and see what was on TV. And that night, and y'all that are my age or older, y'all remember how they used to have the boxes in the newspaper. They would have the entire television schedule in, like, you know, a really small box, basically. And so the next day, I got an email from Susan. There was no wrestling. I think Trina had been wrestling on for years, right? Amazing. And so obviously I wrote about that. So Bobby Cherry got arrested in that case. I'd heard he had something to do with the beating of Fred Shellsworth. Now some of you, I would assume most of you probably have heard of Fred Shellsworth. He's probably one of the bravest guys in the civil rights movement in Birmingham. He was beaten repeatedly. His church was bombed. His house was bombed. I mean, all these things that happened to him. My favorite story of those is he was beaten so severely that he had to go to the hospital, and you know, they found out he was going to be okay, and he told the doctor, "Well, the Lord knew I lived in a hard town, so He gave me a hard head." So I've always loved that. Loved it, and I got to meet him. It was a real honor to meet him. Trying to enroll in the school. This white mob gathered, just proceeded to beat him mercilessly, and that's how he went into the hospital. So, anyway, as I mentioned, I've heard Bobby Cherry had something to do with that, and so in the mail one day, I get this big, thick biography of Fred Shellsworth. I don't know if you're like me, but the first thing I do when I get a big, thick book, look at the picture. So I'm flipping through the pictures, and there's a picture of the beating of Fred Shellsworth in the book. And I'm looking for Bobby Cherry, you know, and there's nothing to make out. It's kind of a real distant shot. So I called the author and said, "Hey, are there any other pictures of the beating of Fred Shellsworth?" He's like, "There's footage of it." Like, you're kidding. So he pointed me to this old CBS documentary, so I got the documentary, and Ted guy put it on a computer, and so if I slow it down and look at it. And Bobby Cherry had kind of a semi-screen son. He was a truck driver. He used to come through Jackson. So I called him up. I said, "Hey, would you mind coming by and looking at this?" He said, "Sure." So he came by one day, and I played it for him. He's like, "Yep, there's Dad." He even pointed out something I didn't see. He's like, "Yeah, you see him reaching in his right front pocket? That's where he kept his brass knuckles." Sure enough, you can see him pull his brass knuckles out and just waylay Fred Shellsworth. So when Bobby Cherry went on trial, they showed that footage of him beating Fred Shellsworth, and they introduced the television laws that showed there was no wrestling. And he was convicted. And got 4 life sentences. Absolutely. The case I've written the most about has been what's sometimes called the Mississippi Burning case. I mean, the reason for the name is the FBI gave that name. Obviously, it was the church burning. An African-American church was burned to the ground over in Neshoba County. And that was really what prompted all, you know, the Klan burned it down to basically try and lure the civil rights workers over there. And beat members, Bud Cole, his, and some others over there. But you probably know that story. I mean, the 3 civil rights workers were investigating that church fire. They're on their way back here when Cecil Price, who was a deputy in Neshoba County, pulled them over for, quote unquote, for speeding, put them in jail, and basically then released them in kind of the waiting hands of the Klansmen. And Edgar Ray Killen, of course, as you know, gathered up all those guys and came up there, but of course had an alibi for himself, you know. They dropped him off at the funeral home there in Philadelphia. So, anyway, remember what I told you before? I said if someone tells me I can't have something, I want to like a million times worse. Well, Sam Bowers, who never, ever, ever gave interviews to the press, hated the press, gave an interview to the Mississippi Department of Archives and History. When I found that out, I wanted that interview. And so was eventually able to get my hands on it, even though it was sealed. And in that interview, Bowers talked about the 1967 federal trial, which was right here. And are they going to do anything with the courthouse? Are they going to, is it still operating? Or I hope they can do something with that. I mean, that would be wonderful. It could be, yeah, that's what I'm talking about, federal courthouse. I would hope they can do something with that, so it's not lost. So anyway, Bowers talked about the trial. Now, nobody had ever been tried for murder, okay? More than 20 guys involved, nobody ever prosecuted for murder. And I gotta be honest with you, that horrified me. The fact that you could have more than 20 people involved in the murders of 3 people, and nobody ever got tried for murder. I mean, that's horrifying in and of itself, isn't it? But there was that the federal trial, as you know, here on federal conspiracy charges. And there were 18, you know, there were 7 convicted, that included Bowers. And the rest of the 18 forswore. So in this interview, this is what Bowers said. He was, and this is a direct quote, quite delighted to be convicted and have the main instigator of the entire affair walk out of the courtroom a free man. And he was referring to Edgar Ray Killen, or as he's known locally, Preacher Killen. So I called Preacher Killen up. We talked for quite a while. At some point he finally said, there's some guy in Jackson just keeps stirring things up and stirring things up and stirring things up, and I just didn't have the heart to tell him what he needed. So I took him and his wife out for catfish. Like feeding them in Klansmen. So we went out, we ate catfish, we talked. And I asked him if he had anything to do with the killings of the 3 civil rights workers. He said no. I said, well, what do you think should happen to the people that were responsible for that? And he said, I'm not going to say they were wrong. And then he proceeds to tell me the story about himself. When Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968, the FBI had no idea who did it. So they sent out agents everywhere, including 2 of them at his doorstep. One knows whereabouts on April 4th, 1968. He wouldn't talk. But the agent left his card. So time goes on. One day, Preacher Killen picks up the card, calls the agent. Wants to know who killed King. And the agent's like, why do you want to know? Killen says, man, I want to shake his hand. You know, I have people, you know, they'll see the photographs or they see the footage of these Klan guys and they're going to trial or they're going off to prison, and they'll say to me, Jerry, why don't you just leave these old guys alone? And you know what I tell them? These were young killers. They just happen to get old. Edgar Ray Killen was convicted on the exact anniversary of the killings of these 3 civil rights workers in 2005. Am I doing okay in time? And y'all remember, a number of you, back in '64, if you were poor, you didn't have a car. And you hitchhiked. Hitchhiking was pretty common, white or black. You're poor, you hitchhiked. So these 2 African-American teenagers, both 19 years old, Henry Hezekiah D. and Charles Eddy Moore, were hitchhiking and just trying to get back home to Meadville. And Klansman by the name of James Ford Seal pulled up in his Volkswagen, pretended to be a government agent, ordered them into the car. So they got in the car. What these 2 kids unfortunately didn't know is there was a whole carload of Klansmen behind them. Drove them out in a remote area, which there are plenty of those, you know, in Mississippi. and beat them and beat them and beat them. Load them in the back of a Ford, in the trunk, drove to the Mississippi River, duct taped their mouths, tied their wrists, tied their ankles, took them out in a boat, one by one in the middle of the Mississippi River, and threw them over the side, where they drowned. Not about you, but if someone does something like that, don't they deserve to be punished? No matter how long it's been? Absolutely. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, it doesn't really matter, right? There's a reason there's no statute limitation. Summer 2007, James Ford Seal was convicted on federal charges and given 3 life sentences in that case. And it's a matter of faith with me, but I believe God's hand has been involved in all these cases. I really do. But the most amazing thing that I've witnessed has not been the convictions. It's been some of the racial reconciliation. Not too long after Sam Bowers was convicted, Billy Roy Pitts testified in a hearing. When he got done, he walked to the back of the courtroom. And guess who he ran into? The widow of Vernon Damer, Mrs. Damer, and several of the Damer children were there. And Billy Roy Pitts apologized to Mrs. Damer and asked her to forgive him for killing her husband. And she forgave him. And she began to cry. And the Damer children who were there began to cry. And he began to cry. And isn't that what God does for us? Forgives us and we have no business being forgiven. And isn't that really what redemption is all about? Trying to make things right, even when they've gone so terribly wrong in the past. May God bless you in your journey of redemption. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Raise your voice one time for the Savior. Don't wait, too late. Right now the world is really in need of somebody that ain't afraid to speak up, to live the way that they others wanna be.